Well, greetings to you, and particularly my new subscribers, several thousand of you, and thank you for joining me and welcome. I return today to the Ukraine with my mission, if you will, is to give you information which you should be getting from mainstream media, but you're not. I've done quite a lot in the past, over the past year, explaining when this war in the Ukraine started, how it started, and why it started. And believe me, it's nothing like most people in this country believe. They believe that just one day the Russians woke up in the morning and invaded the Ukraine for absolutely no reason. I'm not going to go down that route again, but if you want to take the trouble to look at my previous videos, you'll find out exactly why and how you're being hoodwinked, and how your tax is being spent, billions if you're an American, and several billions too, even if you're a Brit, in a war which is stupid, criminal, unnecessary, as indeed a lot of wars are, and this is one of the problems that we have. And the truth is the first casualty, of course, of war, and I'm doing my best to try and do something about that. Now, I'm breaking this little talk down into two parts. The first part I want to talk about is the Russian war doctrine, which is different in the main to British war doctrine. The Russians do not have a concept of holding ground for holding ground's sake, or holding cities or attacking cities for their own sake. They are a massive nation with a massive population, and so consequently that style of warfare hasn't really been brought into the doctrine of the Russians, and the Russian Empire as it was, and then the Soviet Union after that, and indeed today. They don't think like that. Now, we do tend a little bit to think like that, don't we? Because if you look at history, the British held the Ypres salient for almost the entire Great War, to no strategic or tactical advantage whatsoever, but it was a political dynamic, if you will. We had to hold the seat. We couldn't give that ground, even though we're being overlooked, and it cost us a lot of soldiers. The French similarly held Verdun, their meat grinder of Verdun, to no great tactical advantage. It could have been a fallback position, but I'm not going into that particular campaign now. We look at Napoleon when he invaded Russia, that fateful decision he made, and he fought his way right into Moscow. He won the Battle of Borodino, and the Russians retreated under their scorched earth policy. And blow me down, Napoleon ended up in Moscow with nothing to eat. They'd set fire to the place, the Russians had gone, and of course it was beyond Napoleon's imagination. He couldn't understand it. But that's the way the Russians do business. They simply wait and wait and wait until you've run out of puff. Your extended lines of communication are too long to monitor. All forms of logistics become very difficult as your supply line gets further and further. And I'm going to talk about that in the second part of this video. Their job, the Russian doctrine, is to actually degrade and beat the enemy in the field, which is what they did, of course, at Stalingrad. And it's what they're doing today in the Ukraine. They are bringing the Ukrainian army on so that they can destroy the army. They're not bothered about tactically holding ground temporarily and costing Russian lives and Russian artillery, ammunition, so on and so forth. They don't do that. So they're bringing the Ukrainian army on, and they've done that very successfully now. And of course, they've just captured Bakhmut, as I forecast that they would several months ago. And it was inevitable there might be still a few pockets of resistance left in Bakhmut, but that's probably because the Russians fear killing too many of ethnic Russians, which make up some of the population of Bakhmut. So that's one of the reasons that hasn't been completely and totally and utterly obliterated. So they haven't done that. Now, we are talking now about the great Ukrainian spring offensive, which puts me in mind of Dr. Johnson's great estates in Yorkshire. They've lost over 200,000 men. They have run out of ammunition. They've run out of just about everything. They cannot be resupplied by NATO because NATO's run out as well. There's talk about sending them F-16s and so on and so forth, but there's nobody to fly them, and it takes a year to fly them effectively. And that's under normal conditions. So these things can't prevail. The best thing to do now would be to try and get a negotiated peace of some sort, but this is what I was saying over a year ago. War benefits almost nobody, and this is proving it in spades. No good has come of this war so far, and no more can it. It's a bad war. It's an unnecessary war. It's costing a lot in blood and treasure. It's putting Europe under great pressure for enemy supplies, so on and so forth. It's sent Germany into recession, all for the hubris and empire building of the neocons in Washington and their followers in London. Who are very suspicious individuals indeed. So we've seen the problem of trying to capture ground, trying to capture cities, move against cities. We saw this too, actually, just reminding you, of course, under General Mark Clark in the Italian campaign in 1944, where for prestige purposes, his own personal prestige in the main, Clark actually entered Rome. He drove on Rome with his army and let the Germans escape through the back door, as it were, in order to get the glory of capturing Rome. And we saw a political capture of Paris by the Free French in the main, as the British and the Americans fought their way across the Rhine to actually finish the job. Warfare is all about politics, and this is absolutely no exception. So bear that in mind. Now, this spring offensive, if it comes, which I suspect it will in a very small measure or half-hearted measure or whatever actually transpires, because warfare is a funny thing. The mud needs to dry out, and this is something that didn't happen in the beginning. We expected the mud to freeze, which would mean armour could move across it. It didn't freeze, so its mud is a quagmire, and that's going to take some time to dry out. So at the moment, this is basically a campaign halted by mud, halted by the weather, and it's not the first one in history where that's happened, of course, as any historians, military historians amongst you, and I know there are many, know. So we are where we are, and sooner or later, the mass of Russian numbers, artillery pieces, weaponry, shells, ammunition, air superiority will prevail. It must prevail, and I suggest now, contrary to the weather and other unexpected things that happen in warfare, that this war will be over by August. And sooner or later, everybody's going to have to sit round a table and actually listen to what the Russian terms are and abide by them. That's how it's just going to be. That's how warfare is. Very sad, very sad. A lot of brave Ukrainians died for emotional political rhetoric, which sadly still a lot of people are believing. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.